Hello and welcome back to the channel. On today's tutorial, I'll be sharing with you how I drafted and sewed this monostrap gown with a 360 flare sleeve. So if it's your first time viewing my channel, please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and also leave your comment at the comment section. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you for always supporting my channel. Thank you. So I've gone ahead to mark my shoulder to bust, my shoulder to under bust, my shoulder to waistline. So after marking that, the next thing I did was to place my tape, and I'm going to mark my standard neckline, which is 3 inches width and 3 inches depth. After doing that, I'm just going to place my French cuff, and I'm going to draw a line connecting it. After drawing my neckline, the next thing I'm going to do right now is to measure my shoulder divided by 2, and I'm going to be adding half because I'll be attaching sleeve to the other part of the dress. So after marking that, I'm going to come down by 1 inch from this point to draw my shoulder slant. So I'm just going to place my ruler and I'm going to connect to draw my shoulder slant. After drawing my shoulder slant, the next thing I'm going to do is to find my chest line. To find your chest line is your bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches, which leaves me at 7 inches. So I'm going to mark, but before I mark, I'm going to make sure whatever I have at the shoulder is what I have at this point. Then I'll mark and place my rule, and I'll go ahead to draw a straight line at that point. So after drawing out the straight line, I'm going to place my my ruler also this way, and I'm going to draw a straight line. After drawing out that straight line, I'm going to label it as CL, meaning chest line. Next thing I'll be doing is to divide what I have here. So I have 7 inches divided by 2, I have 3.5 inches. So from that 3.5 inches, you're going to go in by ½ inch. After marking that half, you're just going to place your French curve and you're going to connect it to draw your armhole curve. If you don't have a French curve, you can go ahead to make use of your freehand sketch. Next thing you're going to do after that is to mark your dart intake. So to mark your dart intake is your nipple to nipple divided by 2, that is your bust band. So I'm going to mark it at my chest line, at my bust line, at my under bust line, and I'll go ahead to mark it also at my waistline. After marking that, I'll place my ruler and I'll go ahead to draw a straight line. After marking that, the next thing I'm going to do is to mark 1 inch at both sides of the waistline. After marking that, I'll go ahead to mark that at my under bust. At my under bust, I'm going to be marking 1 inch at both sides. After that, the next thing I'm going to do is just to place my ruler and I'm going to connect a straight line. After drawing a straight line at both sides, right now is to draw my cup or bustier area. So I'm going to place my French curve touching my bust line and touching my under bust, and I'm going to draw. So if you don't have a French curve, you can go ahead to also use your freehand sketch. So I'm also going to place my French curve for the other part, and I'm also going to draw. So for my chest line, I'm just going to go up by 1 inch because looking at the dress, it is not too high from the chest line. So from there, I'm going to be taking my dart intake at the upper part. So I'll be marking 1 inch at both sides. So after doing that, I'm just going to place my French curve. You can go ahead to make use of your ruler, and I'm going to draw a line from my bust line down to that's 1 inch I came up after my chest line, and I'm going to be doing that for both sides of the cup. Next, I'm going to connect from that line down to my chest line because the neckline is not too deep. So after connecting this part, I'm going to go ahead to place my French curve also, and I'm going to connect it down to my chest line. So the next thing I'll do from here is to insert my body circumference. At my bust, I'm going to mark my bust circumference, and I'll go ahead to mark the dart intake I have here, and I'm going to replace it at the bust line. Then I'll add my 1.5-inch sewing allowance. After marking that, I'm going to go down to my under bust, and I'm going to mark my under bust circumference divided by 4. After marking that, I'll go ahead to measure the dart intake I have at that point. After measuring that, I'll go ahead to add my 1.5-inch sewing allowance. So this 1.5-inch sewing allowance is not a constant. You can use any ease allowance of your choice. Going down to my waist, I'm going to measure my waist circumference divided by 4, and I'm going to measure the dart intake I have at that point, and then I'm going to mark my 1.5-inch sewing allowance. So after I'm done marking that, the next thing I'm going to do is to connect my line. So whatever I have at the bust line, I'm going to extend it to the chest line. Then I'm going to connect from my bust line down to my under bust and down to my waistline. So after doing that, I'll just go ahead to outline it with my marker. So I'll also go ahead to outline all the necessary parts on my pattern. So my pattern is on fold, and to transfer the measurements I have here, I'm going to be making use of my tracing wheel, and I'm going to trace out my pattern so that it's going to show on the other side of the pattern paper. After tracing it, I'm just going to open my pattern, and this is what I have. So sorry you might not see it, but I can see it for my own part. And what I'm going to do right now is to take my marker, and I'm going to outline it. But before I outline it, I'll go ahead to cut out the necessary part that I need for this particular tutorial. After cutting it open, I'm going to go ahead to spread it this way, and I'm going to draw out the lines that I have traced out. So after tracing out my pattern, this is what I have. Next is to determine the neckline of the dress. So I'm going to place my tape at my shoulder, and I'm going to go out by 1 inch. So right now this is optional. You can go ahead to start from your neckline or go down by ½ inch. Why I decided to go out by 1 inch at the neckline is, if you notice, the neckline is not too close to the neck. So from there, I'm just going to connect it to my chest line area. So from the shoulder line, I'm going to come down by 4 inches. And from that 4 inches, I'll be connecting it down to the other side of my bustier pattern. After connecting it down to that part, the next thing I'm going to do is to connect it from this line down to my chest line area on the other side of the pattern. So what I'm going to do next is to connect or draw out my line with a marker so that it will be very visible. After drawing out my pattern, the next thing I'm going to do is to cut out my pattern. So please, at this point, if you find this video very interesting and educative, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, hit on the subscribe button if you haven't yet subscribed, and leave your comment at the comment section. And don't forget to turn on your notification button to get updates whenever I post on my channel. So after I'm done cutting my pattern, this is what the front part looks like, and we'll be heading to the back pattern. So I've marked out all my basic measurements. So while marking out, I forgot to attach my 2 inches zipper allowance, but that's not a problem. I will be adding it later on the pattern. So from there, I'm going to measure my shoulder to bust plus 1 inch. So what I'm trying to do now is to draw the darts for the back. After measuring that, from that point, I'm going to measure my nipple to nipple, which is 3.5 inches, which is my bust span, and I'm going to make a mark at that point. So from that point right now, I'm going to measure my nipple to nipple divided by 2, and I will mark. But before I do that, I'm just going to draw a line so that I won't exceed that point. So I'm going to mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2, and I'm going to mark it down. Afterwards, I'm just going to draw a line and connect. So after connecting the line, what I'm going to do next is to draw my dart intake. So I'm going to be marking 1/2 inch at both sides. After marking 1/2 inch, I'm going to connect it to this point at the upper part, and I'll be doing that for the both sides of the pattern. Also, my pattern is on fold and I'll be opening it later. So after doing this, the next thing I'm going to do right now is to insert my body circumference. And to insert my body circumference, I'm going to measure my bust divided by 4, and I'll go ahead to mark my 1.5 inch sewing allowance because I don't have a dart there. At my under bust, I'm going to measure my under bust circumference divided by 4, and I'm going to measure the little dart intake and then add my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. Going down to the waistline, I'm going to mark my waist circumference divided by 4, plus I'm going to go ahead to measure the dart intake I have there, and I'll replace it, and then I'll go ahead to mark my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. So after doing that, the next thing I'm going to do is to extend the line I have at my bust down to my chest line, and I'm going to connect it down to my under bust. Then I will connect it down to my waistline. Then I'll go ahead to use my marker and I'm going to outline my pattern. So after outlining that, the next thing I did was to attach my zipper allowance, just like I said. So I added my zipper allowance. What I'm going to do is to extend my neckline down to the zipper allowance, and I used the same neckline for the front and the back. So I'm just going to cut it out and cut it open, slit the back into 2. After slitting the back into 2, this is what I have at both sides. So the next thing we are going to do is to alter the neckline to a monostrap. So please note, the design at the back is not the same as the one in front. So I'm meant to start my neckline from this part so that by the time I flip it, it's going to align with the other one. But for me not to get some people confused, I'm still going to make use of the same shoulder part. And when I'm placing my pattern to cut out, I'll be explaining how to do that. So to cut out just the way I minused 1 inch from the shoulder part, I'm just going to go ahead to minus that same 1 inch from the shoulder part. And from that 1 inch, I'm going to go ahead to make sure my chest line aligns, because that's where my zipper is going to start, to avoid having a high-low neckline at the back. So from there, I'm just going to connect it down to the back, forming my neckline for the back. After drawing this out, I'm going to go ahead to use my marker to outline it. But after outlining this back, I'll still check it to make sure my neckline aligns. So the next thing I'm going to do right now is to cut this part open. So after cutting it out, this is what I have for the back. I'm still going to alter the back because I'll first of all check if the zipper part aligns first. To make sure my zipper part aligns, I'm going to fold in my zipper part this way, because after sewing your dress, if you zip it up, this is what it will be looking like. So right now, I'm just going to connect from this part and connect it to the other part just like this, and I'll go ahead to cut it out. So the reason why I did this is so that after attaching your zip, that area will align. After cutting it, I'm going to open it up and place this way. So what I'm going to do right now is to get rid of that bulginess at the back of the dress. So I'll mark 1/2 inch at the lower part, and I'll go ahead to extend it down to the zipper at the upper side, and then I will cut it off. So with this, my back pattern is ready, and we'll be moving over to the skirt pattern. So what I'll do next is to first get my skirt length. So my skirt length is 36 inches. So remember that our upper pattern stopped at 17 inches, so I'm going to place my tape at that 17 inches, which is my shoulder to waist, and I'm going to get the full length of my skirt, which is 36, or my gown, which is 36. After marking that 36 inches, I'll go down to mark 2 inches for folding or turn up allowance. So after marking that, at the upper part of my skirt, I'm going to mark my waist circumference. My waist circumference is 28 divided by 4. I'll mark, and I'll go ahead to mark my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. After marking that, I'm going to place my tape, and I'm going to be coming down by 7 inches to get my hip line. So you can mark 8 inches if you're a much taller person. So at that point, I'm going to place and mark my hip divided by 4, and I'll go ahead to add my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. After that, whatever I have at my hip, I'll be minusing 2 inches from that, and I will be marking it down at the lower part. So the reason why I'm doing this is to make my skirt fitted. So afterwards, I'll go ahead to connect the line from my waist down to my hip and down to the skirt length. So I'll go ahead to cut out my skirt. So after cutting out my skirt, I went ahead to place it on another fabric, and I added my zipper allowance in front. So after adding my zipper allowance, what I'm going to do right now is to just trace out what I have. So with this, we have come to the end of today's tutorial. Please join me in my next video where we'll be sewing this particular dress.